Welcome to The Explainer. So glad you're here with us today. We're diving straight into a recent Rebel News broadcast that unpacks what they're calling an absolutely unprecedented election victory for the One Nation Party. We're going to look at their big vision for completely disrupting the Australian political establishment. Whether you follow this stuff daily or you're just tuning in, we're going to break down exactly how the commentators on the ground are framing this massive moment. Let's get into it. To kick things off, check out this unbelievably vivid quote from the broadcast. It really sets the tone, right? The speakers described the campaign leading up to this win as fiercely fought and heavily smeared. They literally called it playing water polo in the sewer. That is a seriously powerful way to illustrate what they saw as a grueling David and Goliath battle against established political forces. And honestly, that underdog theme runs through their entire coverage of the night. So here's our roadmap for the disruption arc the speakers laid out. First, a historic election upset. Second, the Grassroots campaign. Third, rejecting the major parties. Fourth, the core platform. And finally, building the orange tsunami. All right, starting with Section 1, a historic election upset, breaking a 130-year trend in Farah. The commentators hammer this number home, 130 years. According to the broadcast, this is the very first federal lower house seat ever won by One Nation. They framed David Farley's victory in Farah's as an absolute political earthquake. I mean, disrupting over a century of major party dominance in the area, that's huge. The speakers proudly declare that this outcome is sending shockwaves through the whole country, terrifying the establishment, mostly because nobody, not even the betting odds, expected them to pull off this massive underdog win. So how did they do it? Well, the broadcast points straight to intense rural support. Looking at the election night data, there's this tiny town up north with just 265 voters at the booth. David Farley secured 117 of those votes. The speakers used this specific example to say, hey, our internal polling was right all along. It really showcases how deeply their message resonated on a local, grassroots level across these rural communities. Moving right along to Section 2, the Grassroots Underdog Campaign, David versus Goliath. When we look at how the broadcast characterizes their on-the-ground strategy, there's this deliberate sharp contrast against traditional political machines. The speakers push a strong narrative that this victory was absolutely not born from backroom deals or political connections. As you can see from the quote, they believe politics just isn't about nepotism anymore. It's not about who your family is. It's entirely about personal commitment and putting in the hard yards. They paint this picture of a room full of dedicated volunteers who just flat out outworked their opponents. The real crucial point the speakers are making here is about a fundamental cultural shift among their supporters. They're suggesting that their volunteers and candidates represent a real return to civic responsibility and patriotism. You know, instead of looking for political handouts, the movement is characterized by the broadcast as being driven by everyday people who are deeply, personally invested in contributing to the nation's future. It's about what you give, not what you take. Let's head into Section 3. Rejecting the major parties, the duopoly's decline. The broadcast pulls absolutely no punches when criticizing the traditional Labour and Liberal national coalitions, what they collectively called the duopoly. The speakers draw this unmissable line in the sand. On one side, they link the major parties with repetitive interest rate hikes, inflation, high taxes, and corruption. But on the flip side, they frame One Nation's vision as all about positivity, hope, accountability, and prosperity. The commentators actually argue that the dirtier the major parties' tactics got, the faster voters ran toward this optimistic alternative. And to back up this claim of widespread rejection, the broadcast throws out a very specific, pretty staggering statistic. They point out that the Liberal and National parties combined are pulling in only about 21% of the primary vote. The commentators use this to argue that the establishment is just being decimated. Think about it. That combined total is less than half of what their candidate secured in Farah alone. They present this as hard evidence of a massive, undeniable shift in voter loyalty. Which brings us to Section 4, the party's core platform, a return to the people. The commentators use some incredibly colorful rhetoric to dismiss what the current government is focusing on. By calling it ideological butterfly chasing, they're basically arguing that left-wing bureaucrats have completely lost touch with reality. The source insists the only fix is to strip away all these distractions and get back to practical, working-class priorities. They literally call for Australia to be reborn by focusing on the actual day-to-day needs of the people rather than abstract ideologies. So what exactly does that look like in practice? Well, according to the source, these are the primary policy targets they're zeroing in on. First, they advocate for completely abolishing the Climate Change Department and its policies.
arguing that trying to change the climate is just a futile effort. They also want to forcefully rip away government interference, what they playfully call socialist fingers, from farmers' properties. Add to that a demand for lower taxes, so the working middle class isn't punished for just trying to get ahead. And finally, they want to rebuild a highly capable defense force to actually protect the nation.
Building on that broader economic argument, the broadcast makes a really fascinating comparison between Australia and Singapore. They point out that Singapore is a tiny island with basically zero natural resources. We're talking no coal, no iron ore, no gas, not even enough water. Yet it maintains this massive GDP. Then you look at Australia, right? Abundant in all these resources, but according to the broadcast, heading down a slippery slope due to mismanagement by the duopoly. They're essentially asking their audience, with all this incredible wealth beneath our feet, why aren't we an undeniable global superpower?
Now for our final section, Section 5, Building the Orange Tsunami, the Call to Action.
The broadcast makes it super clear. They do not want passive viewers. They want active participants to keep this momentum rolling. They lay out some very specific practical steps. Hand out voting cards, go knock on doors, or even throw your hat in the ring to run as a candidate yourself. And the speakers are incredibly blunt about this. They point out that federal elections only happen every 3 years, and they boldly claim that you're being selfish if you can't spare just one single day out of those 3 years to fight for the direction of your country. Talk about a highly urgent mobilization tactic.
Also, independent media coverage was a huge underlying theme of this broadcast. In fact, host Avi Yemeni actually checked into the live stream while he was at his nephew's bar mitzvah. He admitted he spent half the celebration glued to his phone watching the election results. He used the excitement of the night to urge viewers to support their independent journalism by visiting their website. The message was clear. Their ability to cover these historic events relies 100% on grassroots funding.
As we wrap up this explainer, we are left with a pretty massive question to ponder. The broadcast confidently declares that this victory is just the end of one nation's beginning. They're predicting an absolute orange tsunami of support rolling across the country. So based on their claims of historic disruption, intense rural mobilization, and this widespread frustration with the major parties, are we witnessing a permanent paradigm shift in the Australian political landscape? I guess only time will tell, but the blueprint for their disruption is undeniably clear. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating source material today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.